Welcome to the Stocks on the Rock Show. Whether you like it neat, on the rocks, chilled, or warm, everybody's happier when there's money in their account and a drink in their glass. Let's get started. What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's edition of Stocks on the Rocks. Today, we're going to talk about one of the world's most famous entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about Henry Ford. We're going to talk about Ford stock. But in doing some research, I found out about another entrepreneur, Elijah Craig. So today, we're talking about Elijah Craig Bourbon, and we're going to talk about Ford. And this is a listener or viewer request. So if you've got something that you'd like us to analyze, do me a favor, put it in the comment section down below. Any stock that you'd like us to talk about, maybe any bourbon or spirit you'd like us to analyze. And this is a first because it's rare that I find something that I've never had before, right? So this is a first, and quite literally, I am opening the bottle live because this is the first time I've had Elijah Craig. Now, I did a little research on Elijah Craig, and I was amazed. So first of all, Elijah Craig was a Baptist preacher from the Virginia area that moved over to Kentucky because preaching as a Baptist was very difficult, kind of where he was. Moved over to Kentucky, but the man wasn't just a Baptist preacher. He was an entrepreneur. He opened the first paper mill in Kentucky, the first kind of clothing mill, if you will, the first rope factory, opened the first grist mill, donated land to what is now Georgetown College. I mean, this guy did everything. He was first all over the place. He's also called the father of bourbon, right? Now, Heaven Hill Distilleries is the one who distributes Elijah Craig, and he's called the father of bourbon because he was the first one to use charred oak barrels. And if you know anything about bourbon, you know that one of the requirements of bourbon is that it's done in a charred oak barrel, right? An American oak charred barrel. So when I pop this open, we get a little bit of a pop from the cork, not amazing. And so I immediately get hit with kind of a sour mash. So I've actually got, this is called Stocks on the Rocks, so I've got a regular glass, and I got my one big cube, because I kind of feel like I'd like to do one on the rocks. It's the first time I've had this one, though, so I thought I would open it up a little bit and just kind of see what it does. Now, I'm getting, actually, for a bourbon, I'm getting the alcohol off the nose, and I don't normally get alcohol immediately, so kind of give it a second to open up, but it's a fairly light in color. Now, the thing I like about it is that this is age stated. So this is a 11 years, age of 11 years, and it's a 94 proof. And for a 94 proof 11-year aged bourbon, it comes in at a reasonable $30 price tag. Ooh. So the first sip of this is, I get a lot of alcohol flavors right up front, which is not what I would have expected. I would have expected a little bit more from a flavor profile, a little bit more subtlety, a little more notes, but it's there's a fairly thick alcohol flavoring right up front. Definitely got the warming on the way down in. So my guess is that the mash bill has definitely got it's probably got a fairly decent content of rye in the mash bill with its, because I'm getting some spicy notes in the back end. Now I get a little bit of cinnamon. This is definitely one that I think I would like better over the big cube. So, and I like them over a big cube. Frankly, I like them a little bit chilled. I like them a little bit chilled. I like it when it opens up the flavor a bit. Yeah, definitely like it better over the ice. So I like this one over the ice. When the ice is introduced, I'm getting the orange notes. I'm getting what I would call like an orange peel, maybe even a little bit of an orange peel. So I think this is my first time giving this a go. So I'm going to give you another opinion of this at the end of the video when I've had a few more sips, because this is my first time. Didn't do a whole lot of research on it before getting started because I thought it would be fun just to do my first uncorking while I was doing the video. And so, on the rocks, I think I've got a little bit more flavor, and we'll see what the rest is. But let's talk about our stock for the day. And so, Elijah Craig, I thought was a really interesting entrepreneur, right? The first to do a lot of things. So, when we think about entrepreneurs, we're going to talk about Ford. And Ford is a company that has been around forever. Matter of fact, Ford was started back in the late 1800s. And what it was Henry Ford was an engineer. He actually worked for Thomas Edison. He worked in the Edison Corporation, and in his spare time while working for the Edison Corporation, he invented the quadricycle, which was essentially a horseless carriage powered by four bicycle tires powered with a gasoline engine. And that was the first ever that was his first go at the quadricycle. Well, Ford Motor Company followed soon after, and he originally released the Model T. And everybody knows that, you know, what he really did, even more than releasing the Model T and in vehicle creation, what he did was he helped to really establish the usage of industrial complex, if you will, and assembly lines, right? He had the assembly line manufacturing plant, which allowed him to produce the vehicles at a very inexpensive cost to him. Labor didn't have to work quite as hard, actually raised the wages on a lot of people. Now, later in life, he had a lot of issues around dealing with the United Auto Workers Union and threatening to close the business completely rather than bring in the union. So Ford has evolved over time, but they have always been and primarily will always be an automobile company. And it started with the Ford's Model T, and and eventually they got really, really hard times in about the 30s and 40s, and then they came back and they came roaring back. And so when you look at Ford, everybody has some sort of an experience with Ford, whether they know somebody who has one or they had one themselves. I go back to mine. So I have two personal experiences with Ford, and I always make a joke about it. First of all, when I was about 20 years old, maybe 22, I had a Ford Contour. Oh yes, a Ford Contour. I can guarantee you this, when you're 22 years old, the Ford Contour, it's not helping to bring out the ladies. But it was an okay car. I remember it doing all right. And then I bought, my wife and I, we'd been married for about a couple of years, and we needed just a beat-around truck. We bought an old Ford Ranger, a little tiny stick-shift, mid-90s Ford Ranger. It was probably 12 years old when we bought it. It actually did a pretty good job for us. I really liked it, but Ford was never known for those mid-range. And when you think about Ford wants to be known for their higher-end stuff, as far as, like the Mustang, right? The classic look of the Mustang. Let's leave the 80s Mustangs out of this conversation. But the classic look of the Mustang, right? And then the Mustang brought it back. Ford discontinued the Bronco in the late 90s, but they're bringing back the Ford Bronco in 2020. So Ford is really hoping for a revitalization with the return of the Bronco. Now, interesting news, though, that Ford came out with a couple of years ago is they said that they're no longer going to make cars to sell in the United States. They're only going to do trucks and SUVs in the United States because they're just not getting enough bang for their buck selling cars in the U.S. And Ford has had its fair share of clunkers when it comes to cars. Right? I mean, everybody knows the Mustang, and we think about the Bronco, but what about the poor Pinto? The poor Pinto, which every time somebody rear-ended the Pinto, it wound up catching fire. And then, there's my favorite, the Ford Festiva. Take a look at that beauty. That's a beautiful car. No, it's not. So Ford has had its hits and it's had its misses. Absolutely no question. But really, where is it today from a stock perspective? Well, when we look at the fundamentals of Ford is as a price is sub $10 a share. And it's sub $10 a share because fundamentally it's not been performing as well as the market. Matter of fact, earnings per share are down, sales are down, revenue's down, and they just announced before earnings, they announced that their third quarter sales are going to have a big decline. So even before the earnings announcement came out, they came out and announced that their earnings were hitting a bit of a dive. Now, what this is doing is this scares a lot of fundamental investors. And it scares a lot of fundamental investors because Ford has been taking quite a big hit, specifically on the line of its free cash flow. Now, Ford is paying a pretty high dividend yield. The yield that Ford is paying, the percentage Ford pays is bolstered by the low stock price. Okay? So when we look at the percentage that Ford is paying, Ford's paying a very healthy dividend yield. But that dividend yield may not last forever. So a very recent article talked specifically about what may happen to Ford's dividend yield because of the free cash flow and the stock dropping. And so if you're a Ford dividend investor and you're looking to buy Ford in order to collect the dividends, that dividend may not be completely safe. So, when I look at Ford, this is a classic American company, over 100 years old. What do the charts tell me? Well, I took a long-term picture of a chart of Ford. So take a look at this chart. Now, this is a monthly picture. Now, you can see on this monthly picture that Ford had a high of a little over 38 bucks a share. And that was prior to the year 2000. Ford got as low as $1 during the Great Recession. Now we see that Ford is trading sub 10, but really there's no quality demand to stop Ford from going any lower. That's on a monthly chart looking at the big picture. Here's a weekly chart, right? The weekly chart continues to show downward weakness, and it just doesn't get any better even when you go down to the daily chart. So when I look at Ford, what is my overall outlook and opinion on Ford? In reality, my personal belief is that at this time, Ford is a speculative investment at best. And I say a speculative investment at best because I don't see the stock really skyrocketing anytime soon. And the dividend yield being threatened is going to make it difficult for investors to really want to pile in. So if they come out and lower that dividend yield and they say, listen, we're lowering the yield, and more people fly out of Ford, now all of a sudden the price can continue to fall. Do I think Ford is going to go bankrupt? Not necessarily. However, I just don't see Ford as a strong buy. And I personally believe that there's a better opportunity to put your money in more lucrative positions than there is to spend your money on Ford stock at this price. I know a lot of investors will say, well, Ford will never go out of business. It's only $8 a share. I'm gonna go buy 1,000 shares of it. If I buy 1,000 shares, it's $8,000, and that's okay if you're willing to lose everything that you put into it. What I would say is, what if you take that same $8,000 and you go put it into something that has higher upside potential and higher probability? Because even if Ford doubles in price, right? Let's say it goes from $8 a share up to 16, you're still only getting $8 a share, right? On 1,000 shares. What if I can take that same amount of money and go to a 40 or a 50 or a $60 stock, and I can get $20 or $30 a share, right? And now I may have less shares, but ultimately I can allow that thing to grow a bit better. So from a fundamental perspective, not a huge fan of Ford. From a technical perspective, I'm a little bit less of a fan of Ford. So take a look and see what are some other alternatives that you might be interested in aside from this stock, and see where that takes you. Upon further review, this is getting better the more it opens up. Now, I think that's kind of the case with almost every bourbon, but upon further review, this is getting better and better. So I would say that this is a decent sipping whiskey, especially at the moderately low price of $30 a bottle. If you're looking for a sipping whiskey, I think this one's pretty good. I bet you this would make a really good old-fashioned. Because the alcohol notes and the sours would be mitigated by some of the simple syrups, and maybe some of the orange peel would kind of help to, or lemon peel. I use orange peel, and some of the bitters would kind of help to smooth that out. So I'm going to try this in an old fashioned and see what it looks like. But if you've got a cocktail you'd like us to review, if you've got a stock you'd like us to review, do me a favor. That comment section down below, stick it down there. If you're not already a subscriber, make sure you click the subscribe button. Until next week, everybody, cheers.